The day after Christmas, 1991. On this day, the Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was created in 1922 and lasted for nearly 70 years. The Soviet Union included 15 Union republics and spanned 8,649,500 square miles of land. With around 290 million people, the Soviet Union had no shortage of manpower. During this time period, the world went through some significant changes, and at times the Soviet Union was at the forefront of that change. As we all know by now, the Cold War was a time of technological innovation, driven mostly by the rift in ideological systems of countries at the time. The Soviet Union was the spearhead of the communist movement in the world, the United States, the global leader in capitalism. As with most wars in human history, the Cold War led to many great technological advancements. When the Soviet Union collapsed, much of this technology was abandoned, left to be reclaimed by nature. Because of this shift in power, much of what was built and maintained by the Soviet Union was left to rot. With no central governing body, the leftover nations would be left to upkeep these various artifacts for themselves. Leading up to the disbanding of the Soviet Union, their economy had been in sharp decline for years. When the deed was finally done, the nations that made up the Soviet Union were left to their own devices. This period was marked by economic hardship for most. Transitioning to a market economy was not something that any one of these nations knew how to do. Even the elderly individuals in these groups had been living under communist rule for their whole lives. This economic downturn led to nations not having the necessary resources to upkeep the various technology that had been left behind. This quote, "We live in a new world," is a line from the resignation speech of Mikhail Gorbachev, the final leader of the Soviet Union. This new world he spoke of was both metaphorical and literal. Today, I want to take a look at some of this technology from the old world of the Soviet era and explore the history behind these artifacts. Built in 1955, the Baikonur Cosmodrome was originally commissioned as a test site for the world's first intercontinental ballistic missile. To some, this entry might initially be a little confusing. For those who are aware of this facility, you may know that the Baikonur Cosmodrome is actually one of the most active spaceports in the world to this day. With somewhere around 20 launches per year, the Baikonur Cosmodrome remains a heavily used piece of Soviet history. When I first heard of this facility, I instantly thought about this. If you are like me, the word Cosmodrome instantly makes you think of the game Destiny. I basically grew up with this game and put many hours into it as a teenager. The Cosmodrome in Destiny may at first seem to be a somewhat artistic representation of what parts of Russia may look like in several hundred years, but as we are soon to find out, it might not be as far off as one might imagine. As embarrassing as it is to admit, I actually had to look up what Cosmodrome means. Despite being a very cool word to say, Cosmodrome actually just means a Russian spaceport. At first I found this definition somewhat lackluster. At least, I did, until I was met with images like this. What you are looking at is an image of the abandoned Buran space shuttle. When I first saw this picture, I was instantly captivated. These images actually were the inspiration of this video. Originally, the video was going to just be about the Baikonur Cosmodrome, until I realized that there are a plethora of artifacts just like this that all share that same captivating beauty that only abandoned and rotting technology can give. As interesting as these images are, I find that the history behind them is equally, if not more, interesting. As mentioned previously, the building of the Baikonur Cosmodrome was commissioned in 1955 and was originally intended to be a test site for the R-7 Semyorka, the world's first ICBM. Shortly after it was opened, it was expanded to include several launch pads. Originally, it was named Scientific Research Test Range No. 5, but according to some sources, was renamed in 1961 to Baikonur to deceive Western countries from its actual location. The city of Baikonur is actually several hundred miles away, so they thought it would help lead Western forces astray. However, a US spy plane had photographed the site in 1957, so they were already aware of its existence. The facility was adapted for space launches mainly due to its location on the Kazakh steppe, which provided ample open space for radio communications that were necessary for the technology of the day. Additionally, it is more efficient to launch rockets from close to the equator because the rotational speed of the Earth is higher there than near the poles. Thus, the Baikonur Cosmodrome was chosen to be the beating heart of the Soviet space program. One uniquely interesting thing about the Baikonur Cosmodrome is that it was used as the launch facility for the Sputnik and Vostok 1 missions. That's right, the first human being in space was launched from this relatively obscure facility. But how did these end up here? The amount of time, money, and manpower required to develop and build these must have been incredible, yet these sit with no memorial. Largely, it was due to the failing economy of the Soviet Union and the declining space program instituted by it. Near the end of the Soviet Union, and for years after, the economies of the leftover countries were in rough shape, to say the least. The Buran space program was originally a response to the Space Shuttle program of the US. This Buran program was unfortunately doomed from the start. Starting in 1976 and ending in 1993, the Buran program was incredibly expensive for the Soviet Union. Adjusted for inflation, the total cost would be somewhere around $110 billion, no small amount then or now. Interestingly, the US Space Shuttle cost around $196 billion total by 2011, so the Buran was significantly cheaper, but this did little to help it. Despite being much cheaper than the Space Shuttle program, it was still the most expensive Soviet space program, and likely failed due to lack of funding. Despite being similar to the Space Shuttle visually, it is actually quite different operationally. It was originally designed for fully autonomous flight, which was only added later on in the Space Shuttle program. Additionally, the Buran spacecraft was designed as the payload for the Energia rocket, whereas the Space Shuttle was designed to include its own propulsion system. Of course, this is just speculation, but I would imagine that with the economy in such a bad spot for Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they simply didn't have the extra cash to properly scrap or move these machines. So here they sit, doomed to be a destination for daring urban explorers who risk punishment from the Russian government if caught. While I don't necessarily condone trespassing, especially into a secure government facility, without these individuals we might never have been able to see these pieces of history, left to collect dust in a hangar in the middle of nowhere Kazakhstan. The story of these spacecraft, however, may not be over. After 30 years, the likelihood of them being recommissioned for flight is literally zero. However, there is still hope that the Russian government might one day give these works of art a proper memorial. Most pieces of technology this significant end up in museums. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia has been leasing the Baikonur Cosmodrome from Kazakhstan for $100 million every year. Maybe one day they will decide they need the space that these occupy and they will move them to a proper museum. But at least for the time being, these abandoned Buran spacecraft will be left to look like something out of a video game. Now, I know I have broken the rules of this video twice now, with only 2 entries, but these deserve a spot in this video. Originally, when I saw these images, I was led to believe that these RT-64 radio telescopes were abandoned. You can only imagine my dismay when I learned that they are actually still in operation. I was also surprised to find out that there are a plethora of telescopes similar to these. I'm going to keep these on this list because they're some of the more striking pieces of technology I've ever seen, and some of these telescopes were or have been abandoned for long periods of time. The list of these is extensive, and each has a unique history behind them. To detail all of these would be beyond the scope of this video, so I will go into the history of only a few. This picture captures something within my soul that is hard to explain. The way it is framed and shot makes it feel like this telescope is something straight out of a Star Wars film. Despite looking so large that it could be otherworldly, this telescope has an antenna diameter of 64 meters, hence the name RT-64, which is still not small by any means. For those of us that use Freedom units, that's about 210 feet. For comparison, a football field is about 300 feet between the end zones, so this is roughly 2/3 the length. There are actually two of these telescopes, one in Kalyazin, which shares the name of the nearby town. The other, near Moscow, is simply referred to as the Bear Lakes Radio Telescope. The Kalyazin facility was left unfinished for a short period of time after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but was finally operational in 1992. The Bear Lakes telescope was decommissioned for a time starting in 1996, but was later reactivated in the early 2000s. The Bear Lakes telescope was the first of the Soviet Union's fully steerable radio telescopes and was a feat of engineering for the time. These telescopes have the same general purpose as the others we will look at on this sublist. The name telescope kind of gives this away, but they are designed and used for astronomy and sending communications into deep space. The Kalyazin facility was built in 1974 and originally was used for communications with robotic missions to Venus and Mars. The Bear Lakes facility was built in 1979 and became operational in 1983. We know less specific details about its original intended use case, but it was likely similar to the Kalyazin facility. At the time of their creation, these were very advanced and also critical to the Russian space operations. It is suspected that these radio telescopes could have been used to intercept radio communications to try and spy on the US, but since there is no confirmation of this, it will remain speculation for now. The primary question on my mind when I saw these is, why are they so large? Because these are of Soviet design and make, this question has two answers. Most importantly, they are large because radio waves have a much longer wavelength than others on the electromagnetic spectrum. To capture these radio waves with sufficient detail, a large diameter antenna is needed. The resolution of a telescope is proportional to the diameter of the antenna, so large radio telescopes will be able to capture this information much more effectively. The second reason is that the Soviet Union loved building large and impressive things. In their defense, everyone does this, but they needed to show that they were still a global superpower despite their failing economy. These telescopes are certainly huge, but are also not the largest the Soviets ever cooked up. Just like the RT-64, the 70 in RT-70 refers to the diameter of the antenna. In this case, the antenna has a diameter of nearly 230 feet. There were 3 of these telescopes, which, again, were all unique in some ways. For this entry, I want to focus on this one. This is the Yevpatoria RT-70. Just like the Bear Lakes telescope, this facility was abandoned for a time after the fall of the USSR, but was later repurposed by Russia for deep space communications. This telescope was similarly built in the 1970s and became operational sometime in the 80s. While this is not the largest diameter radio telescope made by the Soviets, it is likely the largest fully steerable radio telescope they ever built. This telescope has been used for many things since its creation. This telescope alone could probably have a video all to itself, but some of its most interesting missions are the transmission of messages we have sent into outer space. Lamino recently posted a video that mentions all of these messages, but the list includes Cosmic Call, the Teenage Message, Cosmic Call 2, and a message from Earth. Because of its size and capability, it is one of only a handful of radio telescopes capable of transmitting these messages. This alone makes it unique, but the sheer amount of documented history is also uncommon for these. We have at least 22 documented programs or missions this telescope has been used for. Unfortunately, this behemoth will not be used far into the future like the others. In September of 2025, just 3 months ago at the making of this video, this artifact was destroyed by the Ukrainian army. In recent years, this telescope was converted to be used for military purposes by Russia. Ukrainian forces, believing it to be a valuable asset to them, ordered a drone strike that leveled this facility. This once mighty symbol of Soviet prowess is now gone, and only rubble lay in its place. ROT-54 stands for Radio Optical Observatory, and, in a similar scheme to the last two, has a diameter of 54 meters, or about 180 feet. If there is one thing to say about all of these, it is that the Soviets were not incredibly creative in the way they named things. This entry is actually a double feature. There is one main telescope that is the first on this list to be truly abandoned in our day. The second is an equally intriguing half-constructed solar collector just up the hill. This model is clearly different from the others we have looked at so far. Its function and purpose remain largely the same, but this particular telescope is different. Namely, this model is not fully steerable. The idea for this telescope was proposed all the way back in the 60s, but construction didn't start until 1981, and was finished in 1985. This unit was only operational from 1987 to 1990. Between 1995 and 2010, the telescope got a makeover and was modernized. It was operational for only 2 years before being abandoned once again after the secondary mirror failed and the Armenian government couldn't afford to fix it. Since then, there have been numerous attempts to bring it back into operation, but there hasn't been much progress since 2019. This telescope will likely remain abandoned for many years to come. The half-constructed circular object next to it is a solar collector. This obviously isn't a telescope, but the visuals of it fit with this section, so I'm going to run with it. There is almost no information that I can find for this online, but I think we can take an educated guess and say that this would have been used to generate power for this facility or used to heat it. If anyone seeing this video has more information on this solar collector, please put it in the comments because I would love to hear about it. More recent pictures of this construction include what appears to be a mural on the backside of it. I find this mural to be fascinating because clearly someone still cares about this and is aware of its existence. Someone has at least taken the time to put this up. So why does the rest of the facility remain in a state of disarray? I don't know if we'll ever really know, but one thing I do know is that this facility will continue to captivate me until it's reactivated. Something I have failed to talk about so far when it comes to all of these is just how large they actually are. I have given some measurements, sure, but for the most part, those numbers are hard to contextualize beyond my comparison to a football field. One of the best ways I have seen to really understand how big these are is with this Google Maps 360 shot. The scale is a little hard to get at first until you look down and see this. This staircase to the access door is, by my estimate, about 10 to 12 feet off the ground. Even better than this, if you look close enough, you can see this stairway to the top. Once you see that, the size of this thing really becomes apparent. These things are truly massive. In a world where the largest things we usually see are buildings, this is definitely a departure from the norm. Part of the reason these things are so striking is because of their sheer size. We almost never see structures this large that aren't buildings. Even if we wanted to put these things in museums, we would not be able to. You would literally have to build a museum around them. Of course, most of these can be and are used to this day, but someday, one day, they will end up abandoned. I just hope that when that happens, we will be able to appreciate them for what they are. Chernobyl might be one of the most normie abandoned cities of all time. To say that Chernobyl has been covered extensively on the internet would be a massive understatement. Not that this is a bad thing per se, but I just want to make it clear that I'm not here to beat a dead horse. The story of Chernobyl is certainly intriguing and deserves the coverage it has gotten, but there is a certain artifact near the city that is much more interesting and hasn't had nearly as much coverage. The Duga radar system is an OTH or over-the-horizon radar system. An over-the-horizon radar system utilizes the ionosphere to bounce high-frequency radio waves and refract them back, which allows for the detection of targets that are very far away. When I say very far away, I mean ridiculously far away, like thousands of miles far away. This system is still shrouded in mystery, but nowadays we have some information that has shed some light on a mystery that lasted more than a decade. Starting in July of 1976 and lasting until December of 1989, both amateur and professional radio operators alike noticed a constant tapping sound on shortwave radio frequencies. At the time, nobody really knew where the sound was emanating from. Experts at NATO were able to correctly conclude that the sound was from an over-the-horizon radar system and were also able to make an educated guess that its location was from somewhere within the Soviet Union. At the time, the Soviet Union kept this project tightly under wraps, and it remained a mystery for quite a while. One story even indicates that a reporter who went to Chernobyl after the reactor meltdown was told that the massive structure was an unfinished hotel. The system was so powerful that it disrupted everything from aviation communications to TV broadcasts. Something that I have never heard anyone talk about is that Chernobyl the town and the power plant located there were likely established to help power and support this massive array. This system required so much power that it would be necessary to have a power plant nearby. This system could pull up to 10 megawatts of power, which is equivalent to the usage of about 2,000 homes. The system was operational from 1976 to 1989, and it only ended up being shut down because of the nuclear meltdown that Chernobyl is known for. With no power plant and no one to operate it, the system fell into a state of disarray. When the Soviet Union fell in 1991, it was eventually revealed that everyone's speculation was correct. The specifics of how the system works is complicated, but in essence, this array near Chernobyl is the receiver, and there was a transmitter roughly 40 miles away located in Lyubek. The transmitter was dismantled in the early 2000s, but the receiver near Chernobyl is still standing. The transmitter would bounce shortwave radio signals off the ionosphere. Missiles leave a trail of plasma that would reflect these radio waves as well. This reflection could be used to roughly detect where a missile was. The system was tested and was able to accurately detect the launches from our old friends at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. To this day, this is just about all the information we have on this project. Much of this information is extrapolated based on what we know about how these radar systems work, and not from what we have been told by Russia. Unfortunately, a lot of the nitty-gritty details have been lost to time, either destroyed or locked away. But one thing we know for sure is that this striking piece of technology will be a destination for urban explorers for years to come. For the final entry on our list, I want to take a look at the Istra High Voltage Research Center. Like with some of the other entries we've looked at, this is not technically abandoned. Its last documented use was about 11 years ago, so it is certainly bordering on abandonment, but technically speaking, it could still be used today if somebody wanted to get it working. Built in the 1970s, this facility was initially designed with the purpose of testing the lightning resistance of certain aircraft materials. The facility is speculated to have the world's largest Marx generator housed there. For those who do not know, a Marx generator is a device that uses low DC voltage to charge capacitors in parallel that are then discharged in series to create single pulses of high voltage electricity. This can be used to simulate things like lightning strikes. In 1982, construction started on a dome that would be used for EMP testing, but in 1985, midway through construction, the dome collapsed, leading to the abandonment of the project. The facility was still used for other testing, but never featured any EMP tests, despite being slated to do so. The coils shown in these pictures are often incorrectly identified as Tesla coils. From everything I have seen, this appears to be misinformation. In reality, these coils are actually used in the Marx generator. These pictures are particularly interesting to me because they are so much different than any other power plant we see on a daily basis. Sure, there are power stations and transformers scattered across our cities and towns, but rarely do we see anything like this. This facility also stands out because of its sheer power capabilities. When discharged at max capacity, this facility has the same power output as the entirety of all the power generating stations in the whole of Russia. Beyond its captivating looks, this thing is completely overkill in the power department. This facility may at some point be reactivated and used for some experiments, but for now it will remain abandoned and left to be reclaimed by nature. Pictures like the ones I have been showing invoke a certain emotion in me that I find hard to put to words. There is a strange beauty to all of these creations that I think can only really be brought out in certain conditions. Seeing abandoned things in general is kind of eerie. I have an abandoned apartment complex near where I live that is strange to see every time I drive by it. In a place that is fairly densely populated, it is hard to imagine a world where all the time and money that went into creating the building seems to be going to waste. These devices and artifacts bring that feeling to a new level. The time and money required to build an apartment building is nothing compared to the millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of hours that likely went into these. I think the most captivating part about all of these is that they are rare and abandoned. In our daily lives, we don't often encounter things that are anything like this. Most things that take this much time and money to build don't just get left to sit around. At least in the US, if something was this costly, it usually ends up in a museum rather than in the middle of nowhere. Of course, as I pointed out earlier, some of these things are simply too large to realistically be moved. Some of these would simply have to be turned into a museum rather than be moved. This alone can explain why these are left the way they are. There is a somewhat amusing joke I saw in the comments of one of the posts that contained these pictures that said something along the lines of, "Technology from the Soviet Union either broke instantly or lasted for decades." I find this to be a funny but not inaccurate statement. Because of the economy at the time, and the fact that for much of the time the Soviet Union operated, they were in the Cold War, it led to an interesting dichotomy. A lot of Soviet military technology was amazing and groundbreaking at the time, but this single-minded focus and extensive use of money to develop military technology left the common man with some, let's say, less than robust consumer goods. The Soviets made some incredible things and really did push the world forward technologically, but they unfortunately left their population out to dry because of this. Far be it for me to question the Soviets, but maybe if they had spent a little more time taking care of their people, we might not have these stunning artifacts left behind, but the people that helped create them would have lived a little more comfortably. When we maintain not only our technology, but the people of our nations, we as a species will last far into the future.